The U.S. reiterates a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent. American officials keep beating the war drums, even while the Ukrainian president pleads for everyone to calm down. So, what is Washington really trying to achieve? I'm Jafar Hasnan, and today's Newsmaker is the U.S.'s strategy in Ukraine. When U.S. President Joe Biden said America is back, is this what he had in mind? That the U.S. would be a key player in tense foreign flashpoints? Russia says it has no intention of invading Ukraine, and yet that is all American policymakers seem to be talking about. From Congress to cable news, the threat of Russian military action is getting all the attention. Why? Well, tensions along the Ukrainian border are certainly high. NATO categorically rejected Moscow's request that Ukraine never be allowed to join the alliance, a military coalition that has been expanding ever closer to Russian borders over the past decades. The Kremlin says Putin will respond when he considers it necessary. But today, we are looking at what the White House wants. What is Washington's ultimate aim here? On the surface, the U.S. is pressuring Russia to pull back its military forces that have amassed near Ukraine's border. The U.S. Senate is set to pass a package of unprecedented economic sanctions against Putin this week. It seems like the one thing that both Democrats and Republicans can agree on.
I believe all options need to be on the table. The president can exert that option, or he could target it against very significant Russian banks, would have a crippling effect on Russia's economy. So I believe giving the president the total arsenal of tools, sanctions, the expedited delivery of lethal weapons, the dealing with the misinformation that Russia is generating, the cyber attacks, all of that is envisioned in our legislation, and it is a comprehensive and powerful approach that says to Putin, you have a choice, diplomacy or conflict. If it's conflict, you will pay a devastating price.
There's a lot of us that believe that if Putin sees weakness, if he sees bumbling, if he sees ineptitude, if he sees indecision, that he will take advantage of that. I don't think he's made a decision to do that yet. What Bob and I and a coalition of bipartisan senators are attempting to do is to project the resolve that we have as Americans to see that he doesn't do that, to provide the strength, to project the strength, and convince him that this would be a very, very bad idea, and it's going to be extremely painful. This is not the same as the Crimea when he did this last time. There is substantially more worldwide opposition to his thoughts this time.
The U.S. called for a UN Security Council meeting to give Russia a chance to explain itself, but Washington has already planted seeds of doubt in Moscow's side of the story.
We've seen the Russian playbook before. They are using disinformation. They're encouraging Ukrainians not to worry about an attack, but we know that the attack is possible. You don't amass 100,000 troops if you don't have intentions to use them.
Will the U.S. do anything more than just impose sanctions against the Kremlin if Russia invades? Obviously, the Ukrainian leader is hoping it won't come to that, but President Zelensky seems concerned by the role the U.S. has played in escalating the situation.
I talked about this with the U.S. president, and I think that the politics should be balanced. I'm not saying that he has influence on the media. They are free, but the politics have to be balanced. And journalists, if they want to understand the situation, let them come to Kiev. Are tanks driving here on our streets? No. But it feels like this if you're not here. Then you feel like this. I do not want Ukraine to be part of an agreement between President Biden and President Putin. President Biden has assured me many times, and yesterday as well, that no decision about Ukraine's fate will be made behind Ukraine's back.
Meanwhile, there are other mediation efforts underway that exclude the U.S. France and Germany have held their own direct talks with Russian and Ukrainian representatives. And both Kiev and Moscow have welcomed Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's offer to defuse tensions. and Ankara seems well poised to mediate. The Turkish military is the second largest in NATO, and the country maintains close ties with Moscow. So that brings us back to what Joe Biden is trying to achieve. Is this about forging his own path, differentiating himself from his isolationist predecessor, Donald Trump, or not wanting to be caught by surprise like his former boss Barack Obama was over Russia's annexation of Crimea? And even beyond Ukraine, there are other parts of the world where the U.S. seems to be sending a message to friends and foes alike that Washington is still the central playmaker in global affairs. From Taiwan and the South China Sea, America seems to be reasserting its dominance as a global superpower. According to pundits, the era of competition between great powers is well and truly back. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is William Courtney. He is a former U.S. ambassador to Georgia and Kazakhstan. He is now a senior fellow at RAND Corporation. In Kiev, we have Olexander Scherba. He is Ukraine's former ambassador to Austria and was a liaison at Ukraine's embassy in the U.S. And in Moscow, we have Sergey Markov. He is a professor in political science faculty at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on the Newsmakers. William, let me begin with you. What does U.S. President Joe Biden really want in Ukraine?
The issue is not Joe Biden. This is an issue of European security. So we see all the European countries belonging to NATO, European Union, and the United States and Canada, all pretty much moving together on this issue. They've had a lot of consultations, many more consultations on this than in 2014 when the sanctions were first applied after Russia invaded Ukraine. The degree of unanimity and the strength of sanctions that are being talked about is really quite remarkable.
Alexander, let me come to you. Now, recently, your president has criticized the United States. He says that the U.S. is hyping tensions in the region. Would you agree with that?
Well, I understand my president's motivation because one of the tactics that Russia tries to exert in Ukraine is to sow panic and to undermine the trust in Ukrainian economy. And with this kind of uncertainty, Ukrainian economy can start to wobble. And he was trying to avoid it. That was his main motivation, I think.
So do you agree with the way the U.S. is handling the crisis at this point?
I think U.S. is doing the right thing, supporting Ukraine and letting Ukraine and the world know that it has information that Putin is ready to go very, very far in this time. Many people in Ukraine see it a little bit differently because they understand that they are ready to fight. Ukraine is ready to fight tooth and nail. They hope that Putin understands that well, and the price at which this war will come to Russia will be enormous because Ukraine will push back. And if he acts rationally, he wouldn't start it. So the whole hope is that Putin acts rationally.
Okay, now Sergey, let me come to you. I asked William, what does Biden want in Ukraine? Let me ask you, what does Putin want in Ukraine?
Putin wants, first of all, Kiev regime implement Minsk agreement, which had been signed 7 years ago, but Kiev denied to do it and continue to kill people in Donbass. I myself visit Donetsk, was taking part in the conference and had to wake up in the deep night because of the artillery sharing from Kiev regime. And Putin wants to stop war in Donbass. Secondly, Putin wants to stop political repression in Ukraine. Now we have Kiev repressive Russophobic regime, Russian language, which is in fact language for the 80% of the population. Ukraine, it's tried to be prohibited by Ukrainian repressive, by Kiev repressive regime. And Putin wants to stop this project to make anti-Russia from Ukraine.
Sergey, how does Putin stop this? Through what means?
It's a different ways. First of all, I think more realistically, if a Kiev repressive regime denied to implement a Minsk agreement, Russia will be ready to recognize, I think, Donetsk People Republic and Lugansk People Republic, and to build a military alliance with them. And Russian army will protect these millions of people from the terroristic attack from Kiev repressive regime. And secondly, Russia also can support uprisal of the people in Ukraine, first of all, in the pro-Russian regions, such as Odessa, Kharkiv, and so on. If these people in Odessa, Kharkiv, Zaporozhye, Nikolaev will be able to take part in the honest referendum, they will vote exactly as in Crimea. Absolute majority of them wants to be in Russia, they dream to be in Russia, they pray Vladimir Putin to make some strong decisions to help them to be liberated from Kiev or Soviet repressive regime.
Alexander, you want to say something?
Well, I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. Please, Mr. Markov, don't come liberate me. Most of my friends in Kiev are Russian-speaking. I hear the Russian-speaking and rather moderate, even formerly pro-Russian politicians in Ukraine's east, and they all say the same. We don't want to live in a Russia-controlled Bantustan. We want to live in a normal, civil European country. So please, finally, leave us alone. If you don't, we will fight back.
Okay. William, let me come to you. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden, on multiple occasions, has warned that a threat of Ukrainian invasion from Russia is imminent. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that? Would you agree with the analysis that he is hyping tensions at this point? Because, like I mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, and his defense minister do not agree with that assessment.
I don't believe President Biden is hyping the threat. In fact, most of what President Biden and others have been doing is reporting the facts, the extent of the buildup, which is really far beyond what would be needed even for a large-scale military exercise. The concern about panic, as Ambassador Scherba pointed out, in Ukraine is a real one, and people understand that the regime, the leaders of Ukraine don't want to induce panic unnecessarily. On the other hand, preparedness is important.
William,
so
if I may interject here, why do you think then President Zelensky is rejecting the assessment of U.S. President Joe Biden?
Well, I think Ambassador Scherba pointed out that there's a concern in Ukraine about panic. And so no one in the West or Ukraine wants to induce panic. But it is important for people to understand reality, understand the deployments that have taken place, understand the heightened threats that exist now, far beyond a large-scale military exercise.
Okay, William, so as I understand from what you have just told me, a threat of Russian invasion in Ukraine is imminent. Tell me.
The threat certainly exists. How imminent it is, it's hard to tell. So let's take the Cuban Missile Crisis.
But it seems for Joe Biden, it's not hard to tell. He says it could happen next month. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, about a few weeks ago, he said it could happen within a few days.
So the White House has been saying a distinct possibility that that's what he told Zelensky, and I think that's a reasonably good assessment. But no one knows when the decision will be made. We did not predict when Khrushchev started the Cuban Missile Crisis. We did not predict in the West when the Soviet Union decided to invade Afghanistan. It's not easy on the outside to understand what Kremlin decision-making is. So we won't know probably until an invasion starts, if it does, when it will start.
Okay. Let's assume the worst for a second here. Alexander, if Russia invades Ukraine. Tell me, to what extent do you think American involvement in the conflict is welcomed by Ukraine?
Well, there are two factors that stop Putin from invading. First, the realization that Ukraine will fight back. Ukraine is not what it used to be, what she used to be in 2014. We are much stronger and much more resolved right now. So it will mean that coffins with the bodies of young Russian soldiers will go back, and eventually it will be a very unpopular war, and unpopular wars don't end well for those who start them. The second factor is the possibility of sanctions that would cripple Russian economy. And I think this time, unlike 2014, these sanctions are a possibility. So we are welcoming that America supports us. We are welcoming that America is serious about Ukraine's freedom. But I think the most important factor is our readiness to fight.
Okay. Sergey, let me come to you.
Yes.
Let's assume your country invades Ukraine. I'm sure you're going to disagree with me on that. Let's assume it does invade Ukraine. Are economic sanctions against your country, Russia, enough to stop it?
Of course, no sanction can stop Russia from doing what Russia believe it should do. We, first of all, a big country. We have big economy, territory, population, and we have very good friends, such as China, India, and other countries. Also, we know very well that sanction against Russia is not because Russian wrong behavior. It's because we exist as independent country. If will be recognized the leaders of the United States, all sanctions will be lifted. And so sanctions will be anyway if we will continue to exist as independent Russia. And also let me answer the question which our American and Ukrainian friends don't want to answer about the conflict between Zelensky and Joe Biden. I will explain you why Zelensky contradicts Joe Biden. It's because Zelensky afraid that Americans can make provocation and can provoke Russian army to come to Ukraine and the conflict between Russian and Ukrainian army, because it could be interest of for United States. And Zelensky in such a way will be as a victim, sacrificing for the big goal of the ultra super sanction and another attack.
Okay, you have made your point. I want to continue with the discussion. William, let me come to you. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden has warned Russia, if it invades Ukraine, there are going to be enormous economic consequences. Now tell me, in such a conflict, are mere economic sanctions enough to stop Russia?
Not enough to stop Russia. Let's take the sanctions that were imposed in 2014, months after Russia invaded Ukraine first time. The Russian economy has paid a real price. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the cost to Russian economy has been over 1% of gross domestic product. That's pretty serious. It's helped lead to a reduction in living standards in Russia in the last 7-8 years. But the sanctions are not the only tool the West is going to apply. The West is also going to step up military supplies to Ukraine. That's been happening in recent days. Great Britain is the most recent example of stepping up those.
But William, if I may interject here, now 8,500 troops, that's the number we have heard from NATO. 8,500 troops against more than 100,000 troops. That's like trying to extinguish a forest fire by peeing on it.
Those 8,500 troops are to go into NATO member states in the eastern part of NATO. They're not going to Ukraine to fight. The Ukrainians have not asked the West, the NATO, or the U.S. for troops. The Ukrainians have enough troops, and they're well trained. A lot of them are battle hardened from the fighting in eastern Ukraine. What Ukrainians have asked for is military support, weapons and other kinds of support, and the West is stepping that up.
But here's the thing. The US sanctions Russia. In return, if Russia stops supplying gas to Europe, how is the US going to resolve this issue? Because more than 40% of Europe's gas comes from Russia.
That definitely is going to be an issue. The U.S. has been working with other countries, Qatar, for example, Azerbaijan, to find other ways to supply gas, liquefied natural gas, in some cases, pipeline gas from Azerbaijan, to help make up the difference. But let's remember, Russia depends very much for its government budget revenues and its GDP on selling that gas to Europe. So Russia will be reluctant to stop selling it.
Now, you mentioned Qatar there. We know that the Emir of Qatar is in Washington, D.C. to hold meetings with the U.S. President, Joe Biden. Now, the issue of gas supply to Europe is expected to be on the agenda during their meeting. Tell me, William, is Qatar an alternative to Russia when it comes to gas supply to Europe? Could it be an alternative to Russia?
Multiple countries could be, including, for example, Azerbaijan with pipeline, U.S. exports LNG. It's not clear exactly what arrangement will be made, but there are a number of other suppliers who probably will be interested.
Okay. Alexander, let me come to you. Now, certainly, when we look at the past few months, there have been many efforts by the international community to diffuse tensions in the region of eastern Ukraine. Now, lately, we have also started to hear from other countries. For example, Turkey. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has expressed his country's willingness to try to diffuse tensions in the region. Russian President Vladimir Putin accepted his invitation to come to Ankara. Tell me, what do you think about Turkey's role in mediating tensions between in the region?
Let me first also say something about Russia cutting gas supply to Europe. It's technically not possible for the majority of Russian deposits to be redirected in any other direction. So it's a hollow threat. Russia depends on this gas supply just as much as Europe. About President Erdogan's efforts to help, we are immensely thankful for that. Turkey has shown that in this time of existential threat, it's a friend of Ukraine. Thank you for that. Yesterday, there was a small demo in Kiev downtown where people were holding flags of the countries who showed that they were true friends. And Turkish, I was happy to see Turkish flag as one of them. Unfortunately, I think the main problem is not the lack of negotiator or mediators in this kind of conflict. The main problem is the lack of goodwill on Russia's side, because as you heard, Mr. Markov and many people in Moscow believe that Ukraine, 80% of Ukrainians are just dreaming about Russia invading Ukraine and becoming a part of Russia. You know, they are delusional, and that's the big problem, not the lack of mediators, unfortunately.
Okay. Sergey, let me come to you. What could possibly be done in order to diffuse tensions in the region? What would you say as a Russian political analyst?
There are a few things could be done which will make situation quite peaceful. First of all, implementation of Minsk agreement, which had been signed by Kiev regime 7 years ago, and which still not implemented by Kiev, and which, by the way, have been approved by Security Council of the United Nations. And it's number first. Secondly, stopping the policy of terror against people. And among them, first of all, denazification of Ukraine. All neo-Nazi groups should be disarmed. All neo-Nazi groups should be prohibited, and propaganda of neo-Nazism and neo-fascism should be prohibited in Ukraine as well. And mostly important, this coalition of neo-Nazi groups, which includes something about 20,000 militant and armed people, should, and which is used for the terror against people of Ukraine, should be disarmed and should be investigation. Also, we demand democratization of Ukraine. First of all, liberation of the political prisoners, and thousands of them staying in Ukrainian prisons under the big torture. Then free and fair elections, and Russian language as second language of official language.
All right.
And
I wish we had more time, Sergey. We are unfortunately out of time. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today on this episode of the Newsmakers. Thank you very much once again. And thanks for watching. You can follow us on Twitter @_Newsmakers. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Jafar Hasnan. See you next time.